Step number 5 in the nonprofit checklist is to consider whether you want to use a fiscal agent or a fiscal sponsor or neither one. So what does that mean? What is the difference between the two? And do you even want to use either type of organization? These types of organizations can be a big help when you're first getting started, but there are some drawbacks as well. So let's talk through it. I'm Mark Lyda from Lyda Law Firm. Let's get started. So the general idea here, whether you're talking about a fiscal agent or a fiscal sponsor, is this is a more established nonprofit that can act as kind of a parent or a mentor organization to your startup nonprofit. They can be great to use when you don't have the bandwidth to do all of the back office stuff or handle all of those responsibilities that come with running a nonprofit, or if you just simply don't know how to do all that stuff yet. They also are great for helping you administer grant funds or donor funds if you receive them. We'll get into more detail about that, but that's the general idea of what we're talking about in this video. So sometimes you'll hear the phrases or the terms fiscal agent and fiscal sponsor used interchangeably, but there are technical legal differences between the two. So first we'll talk about the differences between those two terms, and then we'll talk about kind of the pros and cons of using either type of organization. All right, so first, comparing fiscal sponsors with fiscal agents. Well, a fiscal sponsor, think of that type of organization as having more responsibility and more control than a fiscal agent. So if you get grant funds, for example, for a project that your nonprofit is doing, or if you want to seek grant funds and you're not yet set up and don't have all your formal processes in place to go get those grant funds, a fiscal sponsor will be the group that actually receives those grant funds on your behalf. They will retain responsibility for making sure those funds are used properly, but that also means that they'll technically have legal control over those funds. So even though they're kind of steering them toward your group's project, your nonprofit, your charitable purpose, they're in control of those funds, not you. They can also do some of the same things that a fiscal agent does in terms of providing you back office support and logistical support while you're getting started. A fiscal agent, on the other hand, sure, they provide some of the back office and administrative support that a fiscal sponsor does, and they can help you administer your grant funds, but they don't have technical legal control over those funds, and they don't have responsibility for those funds. So if you're using a fiscal agent, you have control over the money, but you also have the legal responsibility to make sure that that money is being used for its proper charitable purpose. If you don't yet have nonprofit status, then the donations that come to you through the fiscal agent will not be tax deductible to the donor, the person who's giving the money. If you do have nonprofit status, or if the project that the money is going to has independent nonprofit status, then those donations will be tax deductible for the donor. So that's the main difference between the fiscal sponsor and the fiscal agent, is really just the level of control and responsibility that the fiscal sponsor has as compared to the lower level of control and responsibility that the fiscal agent has. Okay, so let's talk about the pros and cons of using really either type of organization, because you don't have to use a fiscal agent or a fiscal sponsor. You can go it alone. So the pros for using one of these types of organizations is that they will give you back office support. They will give you administrative support. They have their own nonprofit status. So when you are starting out, that can be very attractive, and they, have all their I's dotted, their T's crossed. They do all the things all those little details that you're worried about. Often the fiscal sponsor or fiscal agent already has all that set up, and, they have those boxes checked. They can help you with grant compliance to make sure that, okay, after you get a grant, There's a bunch of responsibility for how to use the money, how to report on how you're using the money, to whatever source gave you that funding. That can be a burdensome administrative project. Well, a fiscal sponsor can really help you with those responsibilities. And the final pro is that sometimes donors or foundations or even governments that are handing out grants might be more comfortable giving it to a more established organization. So if you're using a fiscal sponsor, the donor might be more comfortable working with that fiscal sponsor than working with you if you haven't really made a name for yourself out there yet. Now let's talk about some of the drawbacks to using a fiscal agent or a fiscal sponsor. Well, one is cost. They do charge a fee for those services. It isn't just all happening for free. Now, on the other hand, that cost may be lower than some of the startup costs if you're going to handle all of the administrative stuff yourself, if you're going to get your own 501c3 status and go through that whole process, maybe hire some people to do your administrative work. Ultimately, you'd have to compare the costs of going it alone versus using a fiscal agent or a fiscal sponsor, but they do charge for their services. And especially after a while, that can start to feel burdensome for what you're getting in exchange for those services. So that's something to consider. You also may not be comfortable with giving up that sort of control, especially if you're using a fiscal sponsor. You may want the responsibility, but also the control over the money that you're receiving. And then lastly, you may get to a point where you say, okay, we're established now. We've been using a fiscal sponsor or a fiscal agent, but we're established now. We can handle our own admin. We can administer our own funds. We can report to our grantors about how we're using that money. What are we spending all this money on with the fiscal sponsor or a fiscal agent? And you may want to transition. Well, at that point, the fiscal sponsor or the fiscal agent may have come to rely on the fees you're paying them as part of their budget. And while they're technically supposed to help you transition as seamlessly as possible, they may drag their feet just a little bit, or it may feel that way to you. So those transitions can sometimes be a bit difficult, and that's something to consider going in. And if you're looking at specific fiscal sponsors you may want to use, that's probably a conversation you want to have right away on the front end, rather than waiting till you're already ready to leave before you ever talk about, okay, what is the process for kind of spinning off on our own and going independent? So those are the differences between fiscal sponsors and fiscal agents, and just a few of the considerations for whether to even use one of those types of organizations at all as compared to just going it alone. Thanks for watching. Please remember to click like and subscribe to help keep legal education free for small businesses and for nonprofits.